knowledge will forever govern ignorance, and a people who mean to be their own governors must arm themselves with the power which knowledge gives. Liberty may be endangered by the abuse of liberty, but also by the abuse of power. If tyranny and oppression come to this land, it will be in the guise of fighting a foreign enemy. It will be of little avail to the people that the laws are made by men of their own choice, if the laws be so voluminous that they cannot be read, or so incoherent that they cannot be understood. The purpose of separation of church and state is to keep forever from these shores the ceaseless strife that has soaked the soil of Europe with blood for centuries. The happy union of these states is a wonder, their constitution a miracle, their example the hope of liberty throughout the world. And I have no doubt that every new example will succeed, as every past one has done, in showing that religion and government will both exist in greater purity, the less they are mixed together. The advancement and diffusion of knowledge is the only guardian of true liberty. If men were angels, no government would be necessary. In republics, the great danger is that the majority may not sufficiently respect the rights of the minority. I believe there are more instances of the abridgment of freedom of the people by gradual and silent encroachments by those in power than by violent and sudden usurpations. As long as the reason of man continues fallible, and he is at liberty to exercise it, different opinions will be formed. A well-instructed people alone can be permanently a free people. Wherever there is interest and power to do wrong, wrong will generally be done. The truth is that all men having power ought to be mistrusted. The circulation of confidence is better than the circulation of money. Americans have the right and advantage of being armed, unlike the citizens of other countries, whose governments are afraid to trust the people with arms. The people are the only legitimate fountain of power, and it is from them that the constitutional charter, under which the several branches of government hold their power, is derived. The essence of government is power, and power, lodged as it must be in human hands, will ever be liable to abuse. In no instance have the churches been guardians of the liberties of the people. Philosophy is common sense with big words. A sincere and steadfast cooperation in promoting such a reconstruction of our political system as would provide for the permanent liberty and happiness of the United States. Let me recommend the best medicine in the world: a long journey, at a mild season, through a pleasant country, in easy stages. A well-regulated militia, composed of the body of the people, trained in arms, is the best, most natural defense of a free country. To suppose that any form of government will secure liberty or happiness without any virtue in the people, is a chimerical idea. Of all the enemies of public liberty, war is perhaps the most to be dreaded, because it comprises and develops the germ of every other. Where an excess of power prevails, property of no sort is duly respected. No man is safe in his opinions, his person, his faculties, or his possessions. Religious bondage shackles and debilitates the mind, and unfits it for every noble enterprise, every expanded prospect. It is a universal truth that the loss of liberty at home is to be charged to the provisions against danger, real or pretended, from abroad. America was indebted to immigration for her settlement and prosperity. That part of America which had encouraged them most had advanced most rapidly in population, agriculture and the arts. The operations of the federal government will be most extensive and important in times of war and danger, those of the state governments in times of peace and security. We are right to take alarm at the first experiment upon our liberties. A popular government without popular information, or the means of acquiring it, is but a prologue to a farce, or a tragedy, or perhaps both. No nation could preserve its freedom in the midst of continual warfare. The diversity in the faculties of men, from which the rights of property originate, is not less an insuperable obstacle to an uniformity of interests. The protection of these faculties is the first object of government. All men having power ought to be distrusted to a certain degree. In framing a government which is to be administered by men, over men, you must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place oblige it to control itself. There is no maxim, in my opinion, which is more liable to be misapplied, and which, therefore, more needs elucidation, than the current one, that the interest of the majority is the political standard of right and wrong. Commercial shackles are generally unjust, oppressive, and impolitic. The class of citizens who provide at once their own food and their own raiment may be viewed as the most truly independent and happy. Every nation whose affairs betray a want of wisdom and stability may calculate on every loss which can be sustained from the more systematic policy of its wiser neighbors. What is government itself, but the greatest of all reflections on human nature? The executive has no right, in any case, to decide the question, whether there is, or is not cause for declaring war. Ambition must be made to counteract ambition. War contains so much folly, as well as wickedness, that much is to be hoped from the progress of reason. War should only be declared by the authority of the people, whose toils and treasures are to support its burdens, instead of the government which is to reap its fruits. All that seems indispensable in stating the account between the dead and the living is to see that the debts against the latter do not exceed the advances made by the former. The capacity of the female mind for studies of the highest order cannot be doubted, having been sufficiently illustrated by its works of genius, of erudition, and of science. A man has a property in his opinions, and the free communication of them. To the press alone, checkered as it is with abuses, the world is indebted for all the triumphs which have been gained by reason and humanity over error and oppression. Religion flourishes in greater purity, without than with the aid of government. The rights of persons, and the rights of property, are the objects, for the protection of which government was instituted. A pure democracy is a society consisting of a small number of citizens, who assemble and administer the government in person. I entirely concur in the propriety of resorting to the sense in which the Constitution was accepted and ratified by the nation. In that sense alone it is the legitimate Constitution. Each generation should be made to bear the burden of its own wars, instead of carrying them on at the expense of other generations. As a man is said to have a right to his property, he may be equally said to have a property in his rights. Union of religious sentiments begets a surprising confidence. By rendering the labor of one the property of the other, they cherish pride, luxury, and vanity on one side; on the other, vice and servility, or hatred and revolt. If we are to take for the criterion of truth the majority of suffrages, they ought to be gotten from those philosophic and patriotic citizens who cultivate their reason. Despotism can only exist in darkness, and there are too many lights now in the political firmament to permit it to remain anywhere, as it has heretofore done, almost everywhere.